Good morning. I'm the Reverend Lynn Gardner, one of the co-ministers at UU Schenectady. She and they pronouns fit for me. Big thanks to the staff and volunteers who've shifted to the different tech needs for today and for your presence and grace as we share this service together. Our story for all ages. Once there was and once there wasn't, a community of wise, caring, and imperfect people. They came to learn, to share, to be inspired, and to be reminded that they are connected in impossibly beautiful ways. They came together because their own souls needed it, and even more because the problems in the world were far too large for any one of them to change alone. The people had all arrived at different times. For some, it was decades ago, while others were just arriving. They came together, sometimes in person, sometimes on this curious thing called Zoom, and each person, no matter their age, brought with them a box. Each box contained the experiences that had shaped them over the last year, as well as their shining hopes for the time ahead. Their boxes held the remnants of what they carried over time, their histories and memories. These boxes, though not particularly large, felt heavy. So much was unclear in the world, and so much was at stake. Their boxes were full of all the things that mattered, some as small as an ocean and some as large as forgiveness. The boxes held their questions, their yearnings and their aspirations, and also their fears, their heartbreak, and their losses. They contained their disappointments, their anger, and their resentments. Those were particularly heavy. While some who had gathered were ready to share these things openly, others preferred to keep them tucked away, as they felt too tender, too gritty, or too unpredictable to bring out of the box. And these wise, curious, caring, and imperfect people gathered together as a community. A community of memory and hope. Some would also meet for religious education or to strategize for justice, to practice really listening to one another in lots of different groups, to sing together because revolutions need good music, or to gather to play games and share food because joy is an act of resistance. They gathered to learn together. When some of their shiny and powerful stories had been shared, one of the wise, caring, and imperfect beings asked a courageous question. What if all the things that hadn't yet been shared, or the things we might be resisting hearing, are necessary tools for all voices to be heard? What if we were willing to be honest about the most gritty, sharp, or tender things? And what if those could make the biggest difference? And so they committed to themselves and to one another to do the hard and risky work of continuing to share honestly and deeply, of listening to understand, of giving up the need to be right about their individual narrow perspectives and to be willing to be changed. And the wise, caring, and imperfect beings saw themselves and one another in a new way. They saw that they were whole in their brokenness, strong in their vulnerability, and able to hold complex truths in ways more powerful than they had ever imagined. And they looked at their stories and all that they carried in their boxes, shiny, gritty, and impossibly beautiful. They breathed in connection, creativity, and forgiveness that was swirling around them and through them. They felt how their liberation was bound up with all beings, and together, with space for each voice to be heard, they recommitted themselves to be part of the long and difficult but beautiful struggle for a new world.
To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes, to let it go. I share this excerpt from the Mary Oliver poem in Blackwater Woods in memory of my yaya, my grandmother, Mary, who passed away this past December right before Christmas. She lived 93 years long, and while her last several years were retreating into the depths of dementia, there wasn't a day that I didn't think about her or something connected to her. And this week, as I was preparing my reflection on today's worship theme, the first person I thought of was her. She grew up the youngest of 6 kids of Greek immigrants. And if you know anything about Greek folks, or if you've seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding, you know that Greeks are supposed to marry other Greeks, and that unfortunately, there is a healthy amount of sexism alive and well in the culture. I'm happy to say that my grandmother challenged both of those barriers, and as a breaker of many conventions and expectations myself, I've always seen my yaya as the one who has helped make my unconventional life possible, even if my life looks very different from hers. She was a rule breaker of her own time, and I link my own contemporary versions of norm breaking to her bravery of breaking those norms. She played basketball, she went to college, despite her parents, mostly her father's disagreement. She pursued a career, not just a husband. She married for love rather than to meet cultural and parental expectations. She took care of her ailing husband for years, shouldering the weight of his care so that he could be at home until the end, and supporting her kids and grandkids and great grandchildren as they became who they were, never putting pressure on us of who she expected us to be. While she was raised in the Greek Orthodox Church, when she was able to choose a faith that she felt more comfortable in, she joined the Episcopal Church, raised her children in that faith, was very involved in multiple congregations, and that was where my siblings and I were raised. As a kid, church for me was where I had routine and community. My parents owned a restaurant and were often too tired to take us to church, but I would get up and oftentimes get myself and my siblings and even go to church by myself. In retrospect, I think I was seeking community and presence, some place to show up where people noticed and were glad I was there. I was drawn to the familiarity and the comfort of others more than any doctrine or creed. And just like my grandmother, when I realized there were more options, I first stepped away from church for a long time, finding community in queer spaces, bars, clubs, friends, and community active advocacy. And then came the children, and because you can't take kids to bars, we sought a place to gather with others and church hopped in the college town in Florida where we were living without really landing anywhere too long. It wasn't until we moved back to Schenectady with the kids and then joined this congregation. There we are, seeking a place of community and grounding for my kids. I'll be honest that the first 5 or so times of visiting UUSS felt pretty awkward, like being new to anything. But like a new pair of shoes you need to break in, over time we got comfy and settled in, meeting people and finding our place. And I'm grateful for the awkward moments, the comfy moments, and everything in between. This is what I know makes a place real. The reality of things not always being easy or perfect, but something to keep showing up to and knowing that others will show up too. So I'll end with another Mary Oliver poem, one that I think speaks to the strange, beautiful, and difficult combination of living this life and community. This poem is called After Her Death.
When the membership team hosts their 3-session Getting to Know UU classes, participants have the gift of hearing and sharing a bit of each other's spiritual journeys and the stories of what brought them to UU Schenectady. The journeys are as varied as the people. Some folks start attending after a tremendous loss, seeking some comfort for their aching hearts. Some have been members in other denominations or other UU congregations before coming here, and hope to find either something new or something familiar. Some seek companions for resisting oppression and injustice, or tools to get through tumultuous times. Some of you, like both Ian and LB, arrived hoping to find a community with similar values and morals for your children, as well as the adults in your family. And like the people in our story for all ages, each of us has shown up here, whether for our first time or our 100th time, bringing with us all that has shaped us, as well as some glittering hopes for the future. All that has shaped me includes time with members of my home congregation. People like Alan Troop, a geology professor with a love of the earth, a strong sense of adventure, and a gleeful sense of humor, who invited me to serve on the nominating committee with him when I was still a young adult and he was in his 70s. I've been shaped by people like Louise Farrell, who taught me that you don't have to know how to do everything to serve in leadership. You just have to be willing to share the skills that you do have and keep showing up, learning and serving with others. I've been shaped by singing around the campfire on the annual women's rafting trip, by being part of a religious education teaching team for 5th and 6th graders, and leading weekly campus ministry gatherings at Oregon State. All of those experiences and memories and more. And here's the thing. Some parts of each of those were really hard. There were occasional misunderstandings, hurt feelings, disagreements, and disappointments. If you've been part of this congregation or any congregation or community for very long, maybe you've experienced some hard parts too. Wendy and I have a friend, Lila Ibrahim, who is a religious educator, author, and longtime member of the UU congregation in Oakland, where we worked our first year out of seminary. As part of that congregation, Lila has experienced great joy along with challenges and disappointments. In a meditation for UU leaders, she writes, "If I am living up to my best values, I offer care and respect and commitment to each member, friend, and guest of our beloved community. There is really no other choice," she says. There is really only one choice between imperfect community and no community. Again and again, she says, we are all called to choose to commit ourselves to building a more just, more diverse, and yet ever messy and imperfect beloved community. This congregation was messy and imperfect in 1985 when Reverend Charles Slapp was called, and he moved from Davis, California to begin serving as minister. Becky Holder, who was a member and leader in the congregation at the time, remembered some of the difficult and messy parts. She wrote, "Although Unitarian Universalism had been on record as supporting the rights of bisexual, gay, and lesbian people since 1970, Charles was advised by Schenectady lay leaders in 1985 not to come out as a gay man to the congregation. So he served in silence." Now, I can only imagine that it was painful and disappointing to be told to be quiet about who he was, to be given the message that a significant part of his identity was not welcome. He chose to stay and offer messages of unity and hope. In his sermon titled Beyond Acceptance in 1987, he said, in the language and understanding of his day, "There are so many hassles in life for those who share the human condition. Let us not add to them through prejudice. Whether we are black or white, male or female, straight or gay, we are on this voyage together. As we are all different, let us appreciate our differences. As we are all human, let us support each other in our humanity." And then in 1991, he was diagnosed with AIDS, and he could no longer remain silent. A congregational meeting was called. At first, he was told not to attend and that others would speak on his behalf. Reverend Charles wanted to speak to those he served himself. As Ian shared earlier in his reflection, that meeting was memorable for those who were there. Not only was there affirmation of his humanity and identity as a gay man, but there was support and compassion for one of your ministers who was living with AIDS. There was a chance for healing of the pain of having been asked to hide, even as there was no cure for the disease that would end his life the following year. His ministry is an important part of the shared journey of this congregation, shaping those present with the power of courage and vulnerability. Our journeys have brought us each here. If you have been part of UUSS for years or decades, thank you. Thank you for being part of the unfolding stories of this congregation. If you are newer, we hope you find ways to connect and to participate, to allow yourself to be shaped by what you experience alongside other flawed, faithful, and fabulous people. Together, we help shape the journey ahead. Again and again, we are called to choose to commit ourselves to building a more just, more diverse, and yet ever messy and imperfect beloved community. May we be part of doing just that. Amen. Salam. Shalom. Ashe. Aho. Namaste. And blessed be.